Dutroux, his wife Michel Martin, and an accomplice, Michel Lelièvre, were taken in for questioning. Over several hours of interrogations, all three maintained their innocence.
He was consistent in his lies, following each lie by telling another lie. It was a manipulative behavior. But otherwise, he stayed very, very calm.
Belgian authorities had no choice but to eventually release Lelièvre, who denied being with Dutroux on the day Laetitia was kidnapped. But moments after he left the police station in Charleroi, a startling witness account came through.
The neighbours of his property in Marcinelle saw Marc Dutroux and Lelièvre return on Friday evening carrying a child covered by a blanket as they returned to his house, to Dutroux's house.
Lelièvre was immediately rearrested and taken back into custody. As his accomplice's alibi began to crumble, Dutroux's interrogation took a drastic turn.
Dutroux knows that we had proof that Laetitia was in the car, so he says, yes, I was in Beatrice, which he denied at the start. I met a young girl, I talked with her, and then she told me she was tired of her parents. Stories, because there are parts against him and he changes the stories to suit his narrative on the spot. Then, at the same time, Lelièvre said she was with Dutroux, and finally on Thursday, he ends up telling us, now that all of these parts of the story contradict each other, I will give you the two girls.
Dutroux pointed to a poster inside the interrogation room of another missing girl, Sabine Dardenne. 12-year-old Sabine had been kidnapped by him in May.
2 days after his arrest, Dutroux confessed and took the police to the basement where Sabine and Laetitia were found alive.
On the 15th of August 1996, Dutroux led the investigators to his property in Marcinelle, where hidden behind a false wall in the basement was the dungeon where he'd been keeping Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhaye locked up.
He pulled down the wardrobe and inside the cage behind was Sabine and Laetitia.
And then we got this, at that moment, incredible news that two kidnapped girls had been found alive in the cage of a person who had been convicted before for this kind of crimes.
It was such a huge thing. All the journalists were on the scene at the time. The news, magazines were there. It is as if there had been a terrorist attack. No one could believe that such a person could exist in Belgium. It was unthinkable.
C'était pas imaginable.
Laetitia, un sourire, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Ne vous inquiétez pas, je vais bien. Merci de m'avoir aidé. Merci beaucoup.
Douglas de Koninck was one of the few journalists who was allowed to enter Dutroux's basement.
We had seen pictures, we had seen images, but being there is difficult to describe because it's like constructed to you wouldn't even put a dog in such a small place. This was really the kind of cage they made to hide guns from the police.
As Belgium awoke in shock to the news that a man from Marcinelle had abducted, raped and tortured two girls over several months, the families of Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhaye rejoiced that their daughters had been found alive.
They are rare occasions when we find the relatives and a policeman or a magistrate has the opportunity to return a child who have been kidnapped in such circumstances alive. It's fantastic, obviously. It is a joy that can be shared with the parents.
Over the next 48 hours, investigators continued to relentlessly question Dutroux. They were desperate to find the two 8-year-old girls, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, who'd been missing for more than a year.
Marc Dutroux was playing a game with his investigators. He knew that he never would get out of prison anymore. He knew that he would be presented as the most famous criminal we've ever had in Belgium, and he wanted to exploit that situation.
He had to be flattered. They had to make him believe that they believed his pitiful story, make him believe that things were not that bad for him. It's true that you were ingenious on this one. You were not caught, and you fooled the police, and here and there. At that point, his ego had been flattered, and little by little he let information slip. That's his attitude.
After 48 hours of this cat-and-mouse game, Marc Dutroux finally revealed to investigators that he had abducted the two 8-year-old girls. On Saturday, November the 12th, 1988, a police forensic team were digging up the yard of a boarding house in Sacramento, California. They had just unearthed a second body. Dorothea Puente, the 59-year-old landlady of 1426 F Street, had left the house and headed to a nearby hotel to have a coffee. But detectives were now very keen to speak with her.
I said I took her and watched her go to the coffee shop. She's supposedly over there at the hotel. So then another detective came and found out by speaking with the person at the counter in there that in fact Dorothea had come into the hotel, walked through the lobby, went to a payphone, picked up a payphone and apparently called a taxi cab because the cab arrived and took off.
Puente had absconded and detectives had no idea where she was headed.
And so at that time we called in the FBI and enlisted the help of other resources and outside agencies in trying to locate her, because that is what was key right now, is to try to find her as fast as we could.
Back at 1426 F Street, one of the many people who had gathered to watch the dig had given some important information to Deputy Coroner Laura Santos.
He told the story that he had dug holes in this yard for Dorothea and she'd paid him cash, and then she just told him she was burying trash. So he came in and pointed out where he had dug holes.
Over the next 3 days, the excavation of the yard continued.
Just as we kept digging, we kept finding bodies and more bodies. And it just seemed endless. Whatever we took down, whatever we moved, wherever we were digging, we'd find a body. It was just unbelievable. She put 7 people in this small yard, and there wasn't even a witness to any of these burials, not one.
The 7th and final body was found on Monday the 14th of November. It was buried right in front of the house, just feet from the sidewalk.
Well, she was kind of bundled up in almost like a scrunched up seated position, but she was missing her head, hands, and feet. I went through every flower pot and emptied them out to make sure that we weren't missing anything, but those appendages were never found.
To this day, we've never recovered the head, hands, or feet. Their whereabouts, it's anybody's guess. If the walls in this home could talk, we would probably be horrified.
3 days after the discovery of the 7th body, Thursday the 17th of November, Dorothea Puente was finally found. She had been spotted by a man in a bar almost 400 miles from Sacramento in Los Angeles.
He goes home, and while he's watching TV, he sees her on TV as being wanted on the news. So he calls LAPD, gives the information. I was just having drinks with this person.
The man told the police which hotel Puente was staying in, and she was promptly arrested. He had murdered his wife and was now finally free to satisfy his selfish appetites.
He just wanted his holiday. And for that holiday, he didn't care. He had to kill her, chop her up, put her inside a box, fill the box with foam, and then try to hide the box somewhere. He did not care what he had to do. So it's a complete lack of emotion towards somebody that he actually shared a life with. And to me, it's the worst type of psychopath you can have.
There are an awful lot of men who kill their wives and then seek to take a terrible revenge on the body. Not always going to the lengths that Kroner went to of meticulously cutting it up and storing it in plastic boxes that didn't smell, but the level of rage and the level of anger that killing your wife means is very, very difficult to quantify from the outside. It's beyond most people's wildest imaginings.
It is a problem all over the world that there will be women everywhere losing their lives at the hands of their partner or their ex-partner. So when we look at cases like the Kroner case, it's just the extreme end of the wedge. It's the tip of the iceberg.
The next day, he set about covering his tracks. First, Kroner stashed the body parts in a storage unit in his hometown of Friedberg. Determined to get away with murder, Kroner then put his escape plan into motion. He had carefully prepared reasons why he and Grace were absent.
There was, of course, the fact that they had requested leave from their respective employers because they wanted to go on holiday together to the Philippines. And he had also laid false tracks. When he dropped a note to the neighbours, he wrote that Grace had left him and he was now flying after her to see what was left of their marriage to save. And he would get in touch again.
On the 2nd of December 2015, 2 days after he murdered his wife, Kroner boarded a plane to Thailand.
He spent most of the time in Pattaya, which is a known place for sex tourism. And there, he met with several women, including one he had already contacted over the internet, and he admitted himself that he also had had sex with these women.
Back home in the small town of Friedberg, at first no one suspected a thing.
There were already different false tracks laid, so that only after Mrs. Kroner's holiday ended did her colleagues from work start to get worried, as well as members of their church congregation who questioned why they had not turned up. People then tried to make contact but were unsuccessful.
When the usually reliable Grace did not show up for work or for her regular church services, suspicions grew. Finally, just before Christmas in December 2015, a concerned friend reported Grace missing to the local police.
Actually, at the beginning of the inquiries, there was no evidence that Grace had indeed travelled. People had also contacted her family. She wasn't there, and nobody knew of a holiday trip or a visit home, and so it became ever more apparent that she had practically disappeared without a trace.
A search of the flat that Horst Kroner and his wife Grace shared drew a blank. There were no clues to indicate foul play or to the couple's whereabouts.
After the act, he tidied up and cleaned up everything very thoroughly. He put the rug on which he cut up the body on the balcony, rolled up. But nobody noticed that at first. However, a small blood splatter was found in the bedroom, but no one knew that a murder had taken place.
Police soon discovered that Horst Kroner had booked a ticket for himself alone to Thailand. But with no body found, the case against Kroner was circumstantial. Nonetheless, for investigators, Kroner was the prime suspect.
Well, it is almost the classic question whether it's murder fact or murder fiction, isn't it? Who's the first person you're likely to die at the hands of? It's almost certainly to be your husband. That's why most murderers know their victims and most victims know their murderers. Probably the most likely victim of all is a wife and the most likely killer of all is a husband.
On the 8th of January 2016, Horst Kroner returned to Germany and was arrested the next day. Then, in a curious twist, Kroner confessed to his crimes and led police to the storage unit where they recovered Grace's body.